When we say it's a seven-front war, we mean it's a seven-front war. Open the news at any given moment and you will see headlines from all of the fronts. In Gaza, Hamas continues to fight and it continues to hold hostages and demand a ransom. Negotiations over the ransom payment continue. Last night in the West Bank in Judea, the Palestinian terrorists opened fire at a bus that was traveling from the city of Beitar Illit to Jerusalem. The terrorists killed a 12-year-old Israeli boy and wounded several others. As Israeli security forces were pursuing the terrorist, he turned himself in. Hamas remains very popular in the West Bank. This morning, the IDF said a drone that was launched from the east was intercepted. From the east means it could have been from Iranian proxies in Iraq or the Houthi pirates in Yemen or the Iranian regime itself. It's not always clear where a drone was launched from once it's detected near Israeli airspace. The front that is attracting the most attention is Syria. Here's a headline that I just saw. France tells Israel to withdraw its forces from Syrian buffer zone. When you see a headline that starts with France tells Israel, you can stop reading because what follows is going to be detached from reality. This is my explanation of why the Israeli military has been operating inside Syria. The Assad regime has fallen. This is a major development in the history of the Middle East. The Iranian regime and its proxy army, Hezbollah in Lebanon, have lost a key ally in its war against Israel. This is a good thing. But the future for Syria and the Middle East is uncertain. Uncertainty is not a big concern when you are far away from Syria and have no skin in the game. Israel shares a border with Syria. Israel is under attack by the Iranian regime and its proxies on 7 fronts. Syria is one of those fronts. Israel has no desire to intervene in the internal conflict in Syria. The future of Syria is for the people of Syria to decide. What Israel wants is peace with Syria. Here's where Israel is concerned and where Israel will take military action. For 50 years, Israel and Syria had a deal. Not a peace deal, a ceasefire deal. It was called the Separation of Forces Agreement. It's from 1974, a few months after Syria's surprise invasion of Israel on Yom Kippur in 1973. The deal was that there would be a zone in Israel and a zone in Syria where each side placed limited forces. In between these two zones, where each side had limited forces, was an area of separation where neither side was allowed to have any forces. A UN force was established in order to monitor the separation of the Israeli and Syrian armies. It's called the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF. As its name indicates, it is a force that observes the disengagement of the Syrian and Israeli armies. The deal from 1974 was an agreement between the regime of Hafez al-Assad in Syria and the government of Israel. Israel kept the deal. The Assad regime also kept the deal. Assad supported the Hezbollah terrorist army in Lebanon, but it kept its border with Israel quiet. The Assad regime is no more. The Separation of Forces Agreement assumes the existence of a Syrian army that is committed to the deal and the existence of a UN observer force in the middle. Both of those assumptions have collapsed. There is no Syrian army, and the UN observers came under attack by armed groups in Syria. The new government in Syria, if we can call it a government, has failed to prevent this major violation of the Separation of Forces Agreement. Armed groups in Syria attacked UN peacekeepers in the separation zone. This is a flagrant violation of the deal from 1974. The Israeli military entered the buffer zone in order to defend the UN peacekeepers and protect the people of Israel. Israel will remain in the buffer zone until it's clear that whoever is on the other side is willing to keep the deal. There's something else Israel is doing. Israel is making the world safer. Thank us later. Israel is preventing the world's most dangerous weapons from falling into the hands of terrorist groups. The Syrian armed forces under Assad disintegrated. Assad soldiers abandoned their positions, removed their uniforms, and fled. The Assad regime had Russian and Iranian weapons and equipment such as ships, tanks, armored personnel carriers, planes, helicopters, air defense systems, missiles of various types, and sites where chemical weapons are developed. The Israeli Air Force targeted all of these things. Israel acted to prevent the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, or other jihadist groups from taking possession of these weapons. Thank us later. Who is on the other side? Who is on the other side of Israel's border with Syria? It's not clear. This is what we know. The main rebel organization in Syria is called the Organization for the Liberation of the Levant. In Arabic, it's called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. It contains offshoots of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. HTS is on the State Department's list of designated foreign terrorist organizations. It's a proscribed terrorist organization in the UK. The Prime Minister of the UK said it was far too early to consider removing HTS from the list. It's reasonable to be worried when people who may have been inspired by the 9/11 attacks and the October 7th massacre approach your border. The jihadists who dream of destroying Israel also dream of conquering the whole world. Israel is on the front lines of a war for the future of humanity. France may condemn us now, but it will thank us later. Let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Daniel. Our first question is from Zeph in our Instagram stories. There has been a lot of talk recently about a hostage deal. Do you assess that that deal is likely to happen soon?
There are a number of factors that have changed in recent days, weeks, and months that may make some kind of deal more likely than it was in the past. The first is Israel's continued military operations against Hamas in Gaza, the killing, the elimination of some of Hamas's leaders who were most responsible for planning the October 7th massacre, the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon. So whoever is in Gaza still holding hostages is feeling increasingly isolated, and at the same time, the Israeli Prime Minister has offered a cash reward and safe passage for anyone who is holding a hostage and releases the hostage. So it could be that certain elements of Hamas in Gaza are interested in some kind of negotiation to end the status quo. Perhaps they will get a big payday, perhaps they'll get safe passage out of Gaza, but that's the deal available to them right now. There may be further negotiations ongoing. I think what's important to remember, we call this negotiations, a deal. Hamas is demanding a ransom. Hamas broke into people's homes on October 7th, took 251 hostages, and it's demanding a ransom that will allow it to remain in power in Gaza in order to plan more October 7th massacres. So Israel has been saying we will not allow Hamas to remain in power. Hamas has been saying, well, we're going to hold the hostages until we get the deal we want. After 14 months of war, perhaps there are some elements within Hamas that have decided they are interested in negotiating a separate deal. At this point, it's really all speculation because it's anonymous sources in the media. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Thank you. Our next question is from Adam on Instagram. How has the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria impacted what's left of Hezbollah in Lebanon?
I think one of the reasons that the Assad regime collapsed so quickly is because of a weak Hezbollah in Lebanon. Remember, Hezbollah, this terrorist army in Lebanon that attacked Israel one day after the October 7th massacre, Hezbollah opened a second front against Israel because it wanted to protect Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah fired thousands of rockets, guided anti-tank missiles, suicide drones into Israel, leaving Israel with no choice but to go into Lebanon and push Hezbollah farther away. So Hezbollah was dramatically weakened, its senior leadership was eliminated, and that left Bashar al-Assad in Syria in a much weaker position because during the peak of the civil war in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon went to fight on the side of Bashar al-Assad. So there is a link between the weakness of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the weakness of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. His army seems to have disintegrated. Other rebel factions were much more organized and ready to fight. It remains to be seen how the Iranian regime will react to all this because they have also ended up in a much weaker position after encouraging war against Israel and supporting those who wage war against Israel. Now the Iranian regime is feeling much more isolated.
Our next question comes from Effie on Instagram. What happened the other day when a building in Israel was hit and not detected by the sirens?
Yes, in recent days, there was a drone that infiltrated Israeli airspace and slammed into a building in the town of Yavne, which is near Ashdod in southern Israel. These drones are slow moving, hard to detect, and fired from all different directions. The Houthi terror pirates in Yemen have a drone fleet that they're using. There are Iranian proxy militias in Iraq that are firing drones. Hezbollah has drones. They have fired thousands of these drones. Many, if not most of them, have been intercepted, but occasionally some slip through. And the Israeli military learns from its mistakes each time that this happens and wonders, why wasn't this detected? Did we pick it up? What can we do better next time? Fortunately, in this case, nobody was hurt, but there have been instances in the past where drones did get through and people were killed. So drone defense is going to be a big part of the current war and future wars, and I hope the whole world gets that message.
Thank you. Our next question is from Debbie on Instagram. Did the USA ever send Israel the weapons that it's been holding back?
I don't know the details on weapons shipments from the US to Israel. I know that the US has been a critical supplier of various kinds of weapons and ammunition to Israel, which Israel needed in enormous quantities as a result of the October 7th massacre. Remember, Israel was not planning on a war, didn't want a war, wasn't seeking war, but after Hamas invaded Israel with a terrorist army of 3,000 men, it became very clear that the status quo from October 6th couldn't continue to exist, and that meant that the Israeli military would need to remove Hamas from power and destroy its military capabilities, and this required a lot of ammunition. And at the same time, Hezbollah decided to open a second front, which meant that Israel also needed to use its weaponry on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel is only a country of 9 million people. Its capacity to be able to develop the weapons that it needs is limited. It must import from its friends and allies. I know this has been a big issue throughout the Biden administration. But Israel has been preparing for this scenario for quite a while. It understands the limitations, and I hope we'll see the results in the next administration.
Thank you. This is our final question from Lotem on YouTube. He asks, how does Hamas still have military capabilities in Gaza 14 months into this war?
I think everyone underestimated the military strength of Hamas. If you would talk to people before October 7th, Hezbollah was the top name of the threat that you would hear about coming from Lebanon, from the northern border, and Hamas was seen as a tier 2 threat. It turns out that what Hamas did in Gaza was turn all of Gaza into a weapon. Urban warfare doesn't even begin to cover it, the extent to which Hamas pre-positioned weapons in every apartment building across Gaza so that Hamas fighters could move around in Gaza, look like civilians, but wherever they go, they would find the weapons that they needed. And if they were killed by the Israeli military on their journey between one military position and another, they would look like they were killing civilians. Also, Hamas had a vast network of tunnels underneath Gaza that could not be seen from the air. And in these tunnels is vast supplies and ammunition. So Hamas prepared for a decade, if not more, for this moment. Hamas was ready. Hamas chose to fight. And it is very impressive the amount of resources that Hamas dedicated toward military infrastructure, completely neglecting the well-being of the people of Gaza, and we're seeing the results of this. I only can hope that in the day after, when the war is over, when Hamas is dismantled as a military force, when it's no longer the government, that the people of Gaza will have a government that chooses peace with Israel and not war with Israel. I want to thank everyone for watching the live daily briefing. We are live every Sunday to Thursday, 8 a.m. East Coast time, 3 p.m. Israel time. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. This has been the Live Daily Briefing. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a lovely day.